All right, here we go. Share my desktop one more time. All right, so some quick news. Again, it's this kind of slow-ish period of the year. The one thing just to bring to people's attention, this is a good free online conference that's been going on, I think, for the past at least 4 years, 5 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. It's the Page Builder Summit, and don't be fooled entirely by the name. Even if you're not necessarily using a page builder, they really have a good range of speakers and topics that they cover. And again, price is great; it's free. If you can't attend, as long as you sign up and you register, I believe every day after they do that day's presentations, they'll send you a link so you can watch them, watch them afterwards. So again, it's really worthwhile. I think I have just real quickly. So the URL is Page Builder Summit. I don't think they put all the speakers and topics on here quite yet, but feel free to grab your free ticket. Again, definitely worth it.
Builder Summit is great. The difference between free and paid is free. You can access everything, I think, for a week. It's one of those. And if you want to be able to go back anytime. And then they have some other perks about being paid. I've done both. One of the nice things was there was some kind of closed meeting groups and all. It's run by Nathan Wrigley, who does the WP Week podcasts and a whole lot of WP Tavern and all kinds of stuff. He's one of the main voices of WordPress right now.
Awesome, cool. Sorry, my garage door is opening. But really, the big news topic we're going to spend a bit of time on, not a lot, to be honest, because we'll get to that in a second, probably maybe 15, 20 minutes, or maybe a little bit longer than that, is, again, we're a week late on our meetup. So last week, last Tuesday was WordPress 6.8 was released. And this is Cecil, named after Cecil Taylor, so jazz musician. So this one probably got pushed out. I assume most people now have either seen it, had a chance to play with it. So it's actually a good time to talk about it a little bit after it's been out in the wild for a week. Kind of the big news, sort of they buried the lead on this a little bit, is that this is really the final major release as we know it right now of WordPress in 2025. There are still going to be minor releases, security fixes, all those kind of things that are being planned. In addition, the Gutenberg plugin, which is kind of a separate thing, that's going to still continue to have releases. So that's where some of the bleeding edge features really get put into that first. So it's not like development on WordPress is stopping, but this is the first time, at least that I can recall, that this is the only one major release or the final major release of the year. So lots of information about that, lots of discussion around that. Let's skip around that discussion because that's a whole separate 20-minute discussion on its own. But anyway, so what we're going to try to do tonight is cover at least some of the big features of this release. And I'll be honest, when Peter and I were talking about this ahead of time, this isn't really that big of a release. There's a couple interesting features in here. So, but compared to other ones, we didn't even feel like it was worth doing an entire meetup devoted to this. But we'll try to cover some of the highlights here. So, Peter, what I'll do, again, because we practice this so well, is I'll bring up like the builder kind of stuff, front end stuff first, and then if there's anything you want to grab the screen for and do a demo. If not,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like you said, there's not a ton to demo, especially on the classic theme side. I was going to go over the source of truth document that kind of
okay.
points to some of the things we could do that. And by the way, we've got a lot of seasoned veterans here too. So if anyone else has some direct experience, I know Sue just mentioned about waiting for 681, which is not a bad practice to do when there's a new release, just waiting for that quick first release that comes out that repairs anything that's an issue. But yeah, this is and I know we want to avoid the bigger topic of things, but
Let's cover that at the end too. Yeah.
yeah, but we should
But,
talk about
so what I'll do, Peter, is I have two slides on like the block editor-ish stuff, and then I think my last two slides, I'll go into more details on speculative loading. So if you want to, whatever you want to cover on these two, or jump into a
it. Yeah,
demo, it's fine.
I'll look to see if there's anything worthwhile.
Yeah, exactly. So just real quick highlights. Block editor, there have been some improvements. Again, if you're using the query loop, some minor changes, enhancements there, including the ability to exclude sticky posts from the query loop. There's also a new block query total, display the number of results returned back from a query loop. A couple other quick ones too. Image block, so you can set, rather than setting a featured image, kind of on sort of the sidebar, you can just select an image within a page or a post, and then click on it, make that the featured image. It's, yeah, it's that exciting. And then there's a reset button for color styling controls. I kind of feel like I'm stretching this even if, yeah, those are some of the big features. Some of the probably more interesting ones, and again, I'll stop. It's like, the style book, which we've seen in the full site editor for a couple of releases now, but now you can use a classic theme or view it at least in classic themes. So you can view the styles that a classic theme is setting, but it's view only. That's kind of one limitation. Full site editor, there's the global styles panels moved to make it a little bit easier to find. There's some zoom out mode enhancements, accessibility improvements. Again, not to kind of scoff on these. They always kind of go under the radar, but there's at least 100 plus fixes, enhancements. And then another real like behind the scenes thing, stronger password security with bcrypt. I forget what the old hashing thing that they're using, but they've switched it to bcrypt. Again, should be something hopefully seamless and visible to users, and any previously saved password should not be affected by it. That's kind of the big highlights. Like I said, I'm going to spend some time talking about speculative loading, but anything you want to jump into, Peter, on these, or anything you want to demo, or?
Yeah, I was just looking. I'm going through what I did. I'll grab the screen real quick,
Sure. Yep.
and then send it back to you. But there's a good document. It used to be managed by Ann McCarthy, and if you know what's going on with Automatic and WordPress, there's a lot of pulling back on the hours, and Ann's been on sabbatical and things like that. But they did take that document called the Source of Truth. And there are, of course, some of them more, but the source of truth gets into a lot of details. This is on the Gutenberg Times website now. So Birgit Pauli Hawk, who does a lot, she also does podcasts and stuff, and working with some other people have moved it over to the Gutenberg Times. One of the things I was doing is looking at, so there's kind of the list and kind of marking with my highlighter extension, a very good extension, by the way, if you're marking up stuff and you can come back to a website and your marks stay up and you can leave notes on it. But like, in what is on classic themes versus block themes. So red kind of being block theme. Stylebook is sort of a yellow versus a green, because Stylebook is in under appearance, and you can look at the stylebook, but can't really do anything with it like you can with the block themes. The zoom out view, that's something that, hey, I can look at the whole page and then manage patterns, only if you're using a block theme. And it's kind of that kind of thing. I get a little like, the majority of what people can do versus what they're putting in kind of stuff. So going through this document, you can get into some pretty very specific and developer level type detail on all the different things. I'm going to see if there's anything. The gallery block is kind of interesting. They find, they're making some of that a little bit easier to work on the gallery block in terms of linking and lightbox and things like that. So that's evolved over time. So if you have a gallery, used to be you had to manage everything at the image level. Now it's more at the gallery level. Again, I haven't tried a lot of these because it's only small things. The simple little thing, set image blocks as feature image. You've got it. You haven't put your featured image. You've got an image you put on the site. You could say, make this my featured image. Saves a click. That type of thing. So, little features like that. Navigation block is block theme. The query loop block, just as you said, Ray, in terms of some of the changing the totals, those types of things. So I was looking at where's the impact, and it's a lot of little tweaks. So
yeah,
let me know if I'm missing anything.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think you are. And again, some of it is like I said, behind the scenes. Even the data views. I think we talked about that a little bit before.
Yeah.
It's as Sue had mentioned too. A lot of it is again, full site editor. Well, I should say a lot of it, but there's some of the more noticeable stuff, I'd say, is if you have a full site editor type theme or something. So
having a little, the patterns, which I think is really important to keep building that out, and being able to organize those a little bit better.
Yeah. All right. So let me show, I guess, then maybe what's the biggest least most interesting change. I'm not sure it's even that big, to be honest. I think it's probably the more interesting one of this bunch, and that is speculative loading support. So I'll spend maybe 10, 15 minutes maybe at the most on this, but just I kind of wrote some notes. We don't do slides anymore, but I still need notes for myself. So what the heck is speculative loading? It's really meant to increase page load speeds, and I'll show you kind of how that works and some of the implications of it as well too. But just at a general level, when a user clicks on a link, the way it's implemented, when a user clicks on a link, WordPress may preload the next page. And so really the thought behind that is you kind of get from a user experience standpoint, it seems like it's near instant because the page has been loaded. So it's like, it is coming from a cache. There actually was a plugin that was previously created. It's still available too, called the speculative loading plugin. Just again, I played around with it. I never used it before, but it was created by the WordPress performance team. I forget how far back this goes, but this is still, again, if you're more interested in how this thing works and some of the advanced things you can do with speculative loading, this plugin is still worth, I think, a look, because I believe it's not being abandoned just because a lot of the core functionality has been implemented in WordPress core. So anyway, this idea, kind of going back to this again, is there's some interesting parts to this. One is, first off, the fact that speculative loading is now enabled by default. So in WordPress 6.8, you don't see anything on the WordPress admin telling you that it's happening, or there's really no options by default on the WordPress admin UI allowing you to turn it off. But you can disable it if you wish. There is a filter that they've added. So again, if you're comfortable with, if you have a child theme, or if you use a code snippet or something, you can add this filter to the functions.php. So it's basically you turn off this WP speculative loading enabled flag. And there's actually, I'll put a link to this after too. There's a WP Tuts tutorial video on how to do that too. It's pretty simple. It's basically implementing this. So just a couple of caveats too about this. The speculative loading only works in modern web browsers because it's a browser feature, it really is. It's so some other, they didn't say modern, but just to show you kind of a list of browser compatibility. So this is from the Mozilla Foundation. Hopefully this is big enough. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Oops. Where'd you go? There you are. So browser compatibility. There's, Firefox right now doesn't completely support some of this, and Safari, etc. So definitely Chrome, and that's what I'm going to be demonstrating today. Edge. I think it's all of the, what do you call it, Chromium-based ones. Although I thought Safari is a Chromium-based one. But anyway, so just that's something to be aware of, that not every browser, even modern ones, necessarily support it. But but the thing is, if they don't support it, then it's not going to do any harm. It just won't do this preloading for you, so it'll just be ignored. Another thing that they mentioned in the WordPress like build notes is apparently Cloudflare, the CDN, Content Delivery Network, they've had this enabled as a feature for quite a while, and they've called this feature, we call it Speed Brain. So Speed Brain, just to show you, there's an article on this too. They did this back in September of last year. So I don't know if this is turned on by default. I don't use Cloudflare. Well, I used to use it for a couple of sites. I don't use it anymore, but it's basically doing the same kind of thing. It's sort of enabling this for their hosted sites, or if you're using their CDN. Another just caveat too, before we get into the demo, is if you're logged in to the WordPress admin, when you're looking at your site, you won't see the caching. It's only for visitors, non-logged in website visitors. And there are some potential, sounds great. It's like, well, why didn't we do this years ago? Well, there's some potential downsides to it. In theory, if you have a site that gets a lot of traffic, if people are just, I'll show you in my example, kind of hovering over a link, or not necessarily going into a link, you could end up retrieving more pages than you really need to, because maybe a person never visits those pages. So there is a potential risk for increased network traffic, increased server load, those kind of things. So something to be aware of. Again, if you have a high traffic site, it might be something you suddenly notice, hey, wait a minute, why did my page, or why these page views go up, or maybe no one's actually viewing the page. All right, so let's talk about how this thing works. So it's leveraging this thing called the Speculation Rules API. And again, this is the Mozilla Foundation has really defined this API. And we won't go into the whole details of it, but Um, but the way that this API is set up is there's a couple of parameters you can pass. One is you tell it what do you want to have prefetched. So there's prefetch versus pre-render, but I'm just using the term prefetch kind of generically. So you can exclude certain URLs from it. By default, WordPress, and I'll show this, I believe, is looking at a page, it's all the links are being prefetched, except for, where I had it someplace here. I think they're not prefetching links that have query parameters, correct? So that makes sense. If you're on like a WooCommerce site or something like that, that you need query parameters passed. It doesn't know at that point, kind of what to prefetch. So, but anyway, so that's one part of this API. You tell it what you want prefetched. And then there's this other, I love the name, there's other setting called eagerness. How eager are you to do the prefetching? So there's a couple of different, where is it here? I think I show, okay, so I'll make this bigger. There's a couple of different types of eagerness you can set. So there's immediate, which is super eager. That means as soon as you hover over something, the speculation rule would fire and start prefetching like crazy. Then there's eager, something in between. But basically, WordPress by default in 6.8 is going with the conservative eagerness. So the rules will fire when a person touches down on, either pointer or touch down, I guess, with your finger. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So think of mouse click. That's really what the conservative one is doing. Back to that other plugin I talked about, the one that they had released. This guy I think was actually doing the medium one. So, and you can play around with that a bit too, I believe. So, what's interesting about this too, this whole eagerness and some of the other stuff, maybe I failed to mention this, is there may be times you don't want this, or if you're a plugin developer, maybe certain plugins don't want these things firing. So there are additional filters and ways that some of these things can be overridden. There could be another one applies it, hey, not for this page or not for this plugin, et cetera, et cetera. So even though there is a default across the board, it really there is some flexibility to what you can do. Which is another funny thing too, well, not funny thing, the thing to be aware of is in terms of fetching stuff, this conservative eagerness means only 2 resources get prefetched. And then I'll show you, it's kind of neat to see what it looks like, how it discards them. So anyway, so that's what it is. So let's look real quickly at a live look at it. So this is my Goofy, one of my demo sites here. So what I'll do is to see it live, again, I'm using Chrome. I'll make this bigger. Sorry, so we can see stuff here. So again, this is just a simple blog page with some blog stories, et cetera, et cetera. And then, so the first thing you do is you can notice you can find this happening in 2 places. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so we can see stuff here. So first off, the rules themselves, we'll see this underneath. If you're in Chrome Inspect, under the Application tab, there's a section under Background Services called Speculative Loads. So there's 2 parts to this. There's the rules, and then there's the speculations. So let's look at the rules first. So the rules is kind of what I said before. There's a rule set that WordPress has created, and this is what it is. So this is like JSON, JavaScript object notation. So it's saying it's a prefetch rule. It's looking at my document object, and it's just basically matching links. That's what href, so anything that's a link on here it's a source for speculation. So what's a speculation? Well, on this page, on this particular page, again, this is going to vary by page, it's all of these links, right? So these are my blog stories are in here. Any other links I have, like on the bottom, again, I think I have just like a couple other hyperlinks in here for other parts of the site. So as you can see right now, all of these are sitting. So here's the list, the potential list of things that could be speculated or prefetched. And you can see the status right now saying not triggered, right? So nothing's been prefetched yet. So we'll go back to this in a second. The other thing I'll show you if you want to watch this or play along is if you go to the network tab, as things are prefetched, we should start to see them get pulled down here in our network tab. So let's prefetch something. So let's and again, the conservative rule right now is it's on a, excuse me, it's on a mouse click. It's not on a mouse hover. That's that's one of the more aggressive eagerness ones. So if I just click on this news story 5, I'm not actually going to open it. I click off. You can see news story 5 here. The status is turned to ready. And if I go to my network tab, I can see this resource was pulled down and it's in the Zoom's blocking me. It's in the prefetch cache. And it'll sit there for a while. And eventually, if I just sat on this page and went off and had dinner or something, came back, that would expire. So it doesn't keep things forever, but there's kind of a time limit for this. So if I go back to the application, so now we have one of these is prefetched. And again, I scroll down. Let's say I click on this one. I just let go. You can see now I have two of them that are prefetched. Well, just again, in the conservative eagerness, it's only hanging on to two of these. So if I go down to this guy and I let go, you can see it's dropped one already. It says failure, the prefetch was discarded. That's what it says on the side here. But if you look at the network over here, meanwhile, it's like, yeah, it's gathered all of these. So it's done some downloading. So the single click part might seem a little bit odd. Like, why would they go with that? I mean, it's conservative. It's like quite conservative. But from a user standpoint, if you're double clicking, think about it. The first click is going to be the one that does the prefetch. So when the user does a second click, it should feel instantaneous to them. So let me just look at real quick. Is that true? This would be hard to tell, but so what did I last prefetch? I've last prefetched the gallery guy. So if I double click on this, oops, sorry, I got to get out of inspect. If I go back to my gallery here and click on it, yeah, I guess it felt instantaneous. This isn't exactly the slowest site in the world anyway. So that's really it in a nutshell. That's what those whole speculation rules are. So again, if you want to see it execute, again, go to Chrome inspect. You can see application tab, background services, speculative loads, and again, the network tab is where you see things coming down. So it's neat, I guess. In some ways, it'll make things. It should make things seem faster. But again, be aware of some of the limitations around it. So it's not perfect. And again, if you have a site that has a lot of traffic on it as well too, it may something you may want to monitor if you suddenly start seeing a spike in traffic and page loads. So, any questions on that? Anything in the chat? I mean, we'll see. Again, I haven't heard of it breaking anybody's site yet or any issues with it, because again, in theory, it's something that if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So
there you go.
All right, no questions about the prefetch. All right, so that was the big 6.8. Sure, I'm glad to do a demo. You're welcome. It was a tough one to demo. Peter and I talked about this before, and I had to do a little digging, which I like to do. We do these some of the dirty secrets. Peter and I do this because we like to learn as well too. Let me bring.
Now, has anyone else experienced anything with the new release, one way or another, or something we're missing, or that you like or don't like?
For me personally, I'll say it did break one plugin of mine, and that was more. There was some PHP function that I think was no longer supported, and I don't know if it was just a coincidence kind of thing or not. There was some deprecated thing, or there was some stricter PHP typing for like a function call that it broke one of my plugins, but it didn't take the site down, but the plugin no longer worked.
Gotcha.
Real quick then, I'm not sure if you got a tool or plugin spotlight.
Yeah, I do. I've got two real quick things to share. Let me real quick. So the first one is a site called vert.sh, vert for convert. What's really interesting about this website is it does all the converting locally. I'm not going to pretend to know how that works. Whatever code libraries that work, but what's nice about this is that you're not sending files anywhere unless you're doing video. To do video, that does have to be uploaded because of the way video works and all, and they have a fast server for doing it. But images, audio, documents, and of these formats can all be converted from one to another. And what's kind of really neat about it is if you go to let me bring up a So I've got like, demo content here, right? So I'm going to highlight a couple of things over here, the flowers that are over here, and you can just drag and drop them here. And it goes right into it. And you can say, okay, convert them all, and you can tell them what you want to convert it to. And then you just hit either go on that one and then download it, or you can say convert all. And it goes through and it converts them to what you sent it to. And what you can download them all. It's kind of, I found a little quirk, at least for me. If I'd have to go here and then come back, and then I get the download all as a zip, which again, very handy. If you have a lot of files that you want to do, you could just do it, and it's all kind of happening locally. So vert.sh, a nice little conversion tool that runs locally, no ads, none of all that stuff that you get thrown at you with some of the other conversion tools. And the other one that I'll show you is a website called svgrepo.com, which is another, again, clean, free. I don't know if they have any ads, maybe a little bit, a few. But you can go grab SVG icon files, and they're all free to use and pretty much free for pretty much anything here. They make a point of saying we don't intermix, and if anyone's used other SVG icon type sites, they intermix a lot of paid with not paid, and then you go and you click on something, and they're, oh, you got to go over to this website and buy it. But these are all included. We were all talking about dogs before, so let's do a quick search on dogs, and these are all kinds of icons that you can download. I don't know how many pages. It doesn't tell you how many pages until you just kind of run out. But you can see these are all very nice icons that you can download, save locally as an SVG file that you can use. You can use on websites. You would need a plugin that allows loading SVGs, or if you're using something like a Cadence where that includes an SVG icon, you could actually put the code right into it. But I thought those were two neat sites that can get you the stuff quick. It's not killing you with ads. You know you can use the stuff. So I was pretty happy to find these two.
Hey, Peter, Sue was asking for that first one, the vert.sh. Do you know when it downloaded them, are they the same size or resolution? Do you know? Does it do any
They
like
are.
compression?
Yeah. So what you upload, you get them the same size. It's just the file type is different, but the size does. Yeah, I used it for a number of images just recently, and yep, you just get it right back.
Cool.
I'll put that in the chat.
All right. Awesome. Thanks. Add it to my list of tools. All right, so let's jump into kind of the main topic of tonight. And again, we're not doing slides, but we'll kick it off a little bit about this. So this discussion we had was kind of timely. We said, let's talk about when is it time? Like, when do you know it's time to either redesign versus rebuild a site? And so we're going to split this up into Peter's going to do the redesign part of it. I'll do the rebuild. And we're talking a little bit about, kind of what's the criteria that goes into play to decide one versus the other. What are some of the logistics around when you're taking on a redesign or rebuild projects, and some things to consider, and also just some examples of like I said, your options, I guess, when you've picked one or the other. So, Peter, do you want to do the redesign first, or doesn't matter?
Yeah, I will. And I think what we can do is, as I'm pulling this up, is kind of have, you and I and anyone else who wants to chime in terms of when you would do one or the other. But basically, and let me get this open. I don't have my Zoom icon at the bottom, so I have to keep moving windows around to get to this. All righty. And then I move that over there. And you can see a screen that says Discover Connecticut. All right. So what Ray and I were discussing when it comes to this, and anyone who's been doing this for a while knows that there are some sites that you go and you go, hey, I can just tweak that. I can make it better. There are other sites you're going, I have to rebuild this from scratch. And there are plenty of times when I see people who think that they need to rebuild a site, and they don't really need to rebuild the site, right? They can just kind of work with what they've got and go from there. And often, and sometimes very often, especially if you're in the WordPress environment, go the other way, meaning they look at it and go, okay, let me. I've inherited a site. Let me deconstruct it. Let me take it apart. Let me keep trying to tweak it, and you when you look at some of these sites, you realize it would have just been easier to rebuild it, even just with copying and pasting can save you time depending on. And now there's with AI, and we could talk about some of these things later on because it's some of the fun things that I'm using and a lot of people are using now. But for scraping a website, I'm using a project right now where it is a rebuild, and I am scraping the site and then I'm asking AI to help me reorganize it. Because in that example, there was a site that while it's on WordPress, and Ray, you may be talking about some of this stuff. It was done using, and if you've been around for a while, you probably know the Genesis theme and Genesis child themes and the way that theme worked, which was very, very good at the time. But now you're like figuring out, well, in what widget did somebody put some code to make something work? Or then you have, again, you inherit a site and you're going, I don't know why this thing is doing this thing. And you realize that there is, an edited functions PHP file that has all this custom code. Or again, some other way of injecting code, especially page builders, certain types of page builders that just don't decouple well. That you may say, okay, to use this in a way that I want to use in 2025, using the block editor, using core blocks, using some well established, accepted and supported block packages. I'm going to show some stuff with Yes Cadence. I could have done Astra. I could have done Generate Press and Generate Blocks, although Generate Blocks generally requires a little bit more kind of understanding of how I'm putting together versus some of the kind of click and go kind of thing. But from my perspective, one of the easiest things, or if you're first in WordPress, obviously you're working on a redesign versus building a site. And two, if that site has been put together pretty standardly, for lack of a better word, meaning posts and pages, right? For the most part, your content is posts and pages. The power of WordPress is the fact that you're separating your content from your design. So redoing the design is to, and I'll air quote it with my cut finger, is supposed to be easy. It isn't always, and it depends on, from what theme to what theme, if you're even changing a theme. And a lot of times redesign can be done on the same theme when what you're doing is saying, okay, I installed something and I used it, and now it just doesn't meet my needs. And I want to, do I have to rebuild the whole thing, or is it just a redesign? Here's an example of, this is the content that I use a lot. I finally got smart enough to create some demo content, which I'm going to put in a package if anybody wants to use or share. But I can just throw different themes at it. And one of the things is to think, okay, you learn WordPress a few years ago, you use a default theme, and then you created all your posts, and now you have something like, this is like the 2016 theme. And you're going through it and you're going, okay, all my posts are just literally stacked on top of each other. And it's like, how do I navigate this? How do I, and this is not uncommon to still see, this type of website out there where somebody goes, I got to rebuild that. And it's like, no, this is a perfect example of a site that just needs to be redesigned, and redesigned smartly. And what I mean by that is, don't paint yourself into a different other corner. If you don't need to have a page builder that has kind of its own code, or if you can avoid well, Divi is getting better, but I don't think, and Ray, I don't know if you don't recommend Divi at this point, right? You were a Divi user.
No.
but the WP bakeries, but also even Elementor, and when you start going, you kind of get locked into some of those things, because when you turn off those page builders, your content is usually kind of in need of a lot of working. But if you built your pages pretty much straightforward, right? And I'll go to the content of this, where I just have, you know, most of my content here. It's just, if I look at just the published stuff, I've created content. It's pretty straightforward. Um, in this theme, it's going to appear a certain way. I do. It's funny. You can have, and this is part of the redesign thing. You may not even need to leave your theme, even if it's an older theme. If you are using the block editor and decide to use something like a cadence blocks or the Astra Spectra blocks and things like that, because ultimately you have an edit window where you're just putting content. And if you want to make that content a little bit more organized, designed, you can as long as your theme has been updated and you're using and I'm typically talking classic themes, because when you're doing a redesign, you're pretty much starting from a theme that is a little bit older. But you could very often, and for lack of a better word, get away with saying, you know what, I'm just going to put in a block package that makes a lot of sense, and now I have control over columns, rows, um, accordions, and all kinds of extra functions that used to be, a matter of deep code or page builders. But in this particular case, so, again, I could even show this with, I was playing, maybe you had a, what was a theme that I loaded a bunch of themes. I actually loaded some, by the way. If you load certain themes from the repository, it looks like more and more just don't work, even though backward compatibility. I found that really interesting, because I loaded like 3 and I was getting critical errors and all from. So be warned, the repository has aged quite a bit. So that's why, for a lot of us, there's about a handful of themes that we would actually recommend. I changed the theme here to, you may have a theme, you may have a website that looks like this, right? You went to the repository, you went to Theme Forest, you loaded a theme because you like the way it looked, and now you don't like the way it looked. So that's kind of the starting point with this. I'm even going to say, like, even if you have a modern theme loaded, right? And you go to see that site, you may have loaded it kind of in its most basic form, right? Which is WordPress, very often the homepage is the blog page. And whether it's like what I was showing with the 2016 stacked all the way, or even like with the cadence where you have, this, there's still the blog now presented as with some form where you can control this in the customizer. But what's nice that you can do is, if you then go to, and I will go to, and I'm not gonna, I don't think I kind of built this with saying if there's anything that anybody wants to do. I just did this afternoon. It's not fully designed, but here is the types of things to look for. So if this is the exact same content as even this is the cadence one, never mind the 2016. That's just putting a design on the front end, but I still have the pages and posts that exist. I added some pages, I tweaked some content, and I'll show you where I did this. But in one of the first things to look at is if you go into settings and then you go into general, right? So the first thing is, okay, well, what have I called my site title? And am I still using the just another WordPress site as the tagline, which is kind of the default out of there. And then also under reading, so this is settings reading, very typically you will see that your homepage displays your latest posts. Well, in a site like this, same content, I'm going to come back to the dashboard. I'm going to go into settings. And now it's like, okay, discover Connecticut. All that is great in the nutmeg state, I just put as a tagline, but I did not show. Now I'm adding a site icon. So I created a site icon. By the way, this is done. I'll show you later if anyone with Chat GPT. Amazing what you can do now with that. And then under reading, I set it so I'm now using the home page is a page I'm called home, and the post page is a page called posts, which I'll show you the difference between what it means to assign a page as your post page versus actually creating a separate page that you might put a post query in. But I'll show that pretty quick. But that's where now, if I'm making that my home page, right? So visit my site. That's this content here, which is that single page created as my homepage versus, the old version of the site, which was just show me the posts on the homepage. And then if I edit this page, I can show you the types of things that I've done, which is one, take advantage of block patterns. They are amazing, especially if you get a nice package that has a design that you really like. In this particular case, I am using Cadence. You don't have to. I've shown over, a number of things. I've shown other places. Astra has patterns. Most good themes now have some set of patterns. They might be more wireframe than others that put a little design into it. There is I like to show the Tyler.com website that has lots of really well-designed patterns that are all done in core blocks. So you don't even have to have something like Cadence blocks loaded as a plugin. And if anyone hasn't seen that, I can show that a little bit later. But when you go and you add a block like this here, if I were to just say add another block, I'm going to show you where this came from. And I'm going to go, in this case, to the design library of Cadence, because that's what comes with the Cadence theme and with Cadence blocks. You can do this in straight blocks. You can build it. And I think I used the Hero 67. Okay, so I added this in, and just clicked it to install it, and then I changed the content. I changed the background image, because at this point it's just the blocks where you can go in. My row layout has this background image, and then all of the little things you can do. Maybe I want to adjust this. Look where your focal points are, things like that. So I just built out this page using content that didn't exist before, but I'm not rebuilding the page. I'm just now adding content to and applying a style to it.
You're repurposing, just if I can interject. So
yeah,
this
please.
is like a redesign option of redesign in place almost, right? So you didn't throw away, like in your case, you didn't, let's say you had Cadence Center before, you're just basically showing a way to redesign is just starting with, hey, my homepage, instead of having my blog post, let me have it as a static page, but let me restructure it and reuse content so that it looks like it's a redesign, but it wasn't like you weren't throwing away anything in
right.
this example, right?
Exactly. I mean, to have all of this is, I just created this new page, made it the home page. This section here, for example, is now, well, I have a number of blog posts. What I put on the page is a post block, and this is the core post block. And another place I'll show you where, the one place I'm using a premium Cadence block, because I do have the pro version, and I'll show you why. But this is just regular. This is the, not core, I'm sorry. This is, let's go back here. I'll blame 6.8. That was new. So this is actually a Cadence query loop block. It's called posts, but it's in the free package. It's in the query. It's in the Cadence blocks. So it has a lot of things kind of built in. You don't have absolute control over everything, but for what I needed it here, that's all I needed. So I just put in the free version, and all I did was to get these three. So I had my head, okay, I want these designs. Let me take three of the posts that go into a place, and let me say, all right, I went into my posts. I created a category called featured. I assigned these three posts as featured as one of their categories. So it's featured and then CT outdoors, CT destinations, whatever. And I said, so include that. So now what I'm doing is on my homepage, I'm sort of having, hey, here's three featured posts because this website, air quotes, is all about posts about Connecticut based things when I use for my demo content. So on the homepage, I can just put this nice, neat little post block that basically has parameters. How many items do I want to show? Three. And then the style, right? So three. There's a place for columns and things like that. So I'm putting all of this into this block. So now I have this section here. Now down here, I just put this in while you were talking, but I got to change the way this looks, but this is okay. After you see the three, now discover all our Connecticut treasures. I'll redo the design of this. But then so I added that as like, okay, there's three, but hey, take a look at all of them. It's also in the menu. I've added a menu that really wasn't there before. Added another, again, just a section with, who we are, which is just, see, I gotta change this. And then this was also a pattern, right? I mean, you could easily build this, right? It's just, this here's nothing but in the, row with sections in it. If you're using a different, what is going on here? But that was just all the elements to create this page. So that immediately puts a facelift on the page. The other thing I did was create the logo. In my settings for the site, there's a place where you set, let's see if I have it over here. Actually, it's under, in Cadence, it's under customize. So if I go to the customizer, where I have complete control over everything, if you're used to the customizer. So if you say you want to change colors, your fonts, all that kind of stuff. But then you also have under general, is that under general? Where is it? Site identity. That's where I set my site icon. I uploaded the logo, set its width, said that's what I want to show there versus, if I want to do logo and title in this particular one, but it's just redundant there. So I took the plain, no nonsense. I'm going to go to the original. That was literally just showing the title and the tagline. And now I, just replace the logo. I'm not rebuilding the site. Now I'm tweaking kind of the wrapper, putting in pages. And I'll show you a couple other things because Ray, I'm sure yours is going to take a little bit.
No, yeah, I'm sort of, and I'm reiterating what you're doing.
Right.
You're showing a lot here, but I think you're kind of showing the back to the redesign in place.
Yeah.
So some of the options that you've shown are, and I know you just showed a logo, Peter, but for example, sometimes a redesign could just be swapping out a hero image for a new image and changing. I don't know if you're going to show this or not, Peter, but like in the customizer, like changing typography. If you just change the fonts across the site or the colors, color schemes, it may look to somebody or in yourself or client, whatever, like, oh, you've done a complete redesign, but it's like, well, you didn't. You just, by changing some basic styling of it, it makes it look as if it's a new site.
Yeah. Many of the better themes will give you classic themes. Block themes are different. But you can set, like in the case of Cadence, you do have ways of setting your color palettes. Say I wanted to set this. Let's see, is it going to apply? So depends on what I'm using the theme colors for versus, but in this case, I put that orange there, or this is a different one. And that's just picking the palette based on how they use accent colors and background colors and things like that. So depending on what you choose, a great example of it, it may be as simple as doing that and saying, yeah, I've been using green, so let me make the buttons green instead of blue. They'll stand out a little bit more. And you publish that, and now that's a look there. Similarly with the fonts, the one thing that I didn't want to get into tonight showing is because I'm still Cadence loading local fonts, you have to do a few things. Some of the other things where you're loading fonts locally, so you're not pulling it down from Google, for example. There's a way to do it, but changing fonts is super easy. You have a primary font for your site, and that says, okay, my base font is, and in this case, this is a font called Inter, right? I can change it to anything, and then you can, depending on how you're doing, like headings and paragraphs, you can change your fonts. Like some people like I think I have a page called styles here. One of the things that I do is I'll go out, I'll kind of create a page that has like color options, and okay, that's the outfit. This is outfit Noto Serif, which is a different font, and these are just kind of loading them and saying, okay, what do you like right now? I'm using Inter, and that's what I've used in my theme to make that live. But then again, then the other thing that you could do is as simple as, an example of adding a page, right? The other site didn't have a very good about us page. It may be as simple as looking at the type of content you're saying, I just need more. By the way, AI generated, chat GPT matched. In this case, using the feature, Cadence allows you to use the featured image for a page as a background image for a header area. You could totally overwrite that depending on what tools you have. So you've got control over pages, posts. I'll show you this really quick. This is using the premium where instead of, I don't want to confuse anybody, but I know it's going to be a little bit confused. If you recall, under settings reading, I set now my homepage to a static homepage, and I set my blog post to a set page. What's interesting is when you do that, you create the page. No matter what you put in the page, if you say that your blog post, that content gets ignored, and your blog post content gets put in there, and it's generally controlled by your theme, right? So this is the default way that, well, I've tweaked it a little bit in the customizer, but that Cadence outputs the blog posts, right? But it's nothing saying you have to use it as your blog post page. You can have complete control over it by creating a page and using things like query blocks and all, which is what this is. This is a different page. This is an example now. This is Cadence Blocks Pro, which gives me an advanced query block that allows me to do things like do live filtering, right? And you can really have a lot of control. Like this is now going to show me only the plants because that's what I clicked on it, or outdoors. And you can set up even more involved filtering and all kind of built into that. So now, I could put in a block, because if I go on the back, and now that I have control over this whole page, instead of it being just how WordPress outputs the blog page, which could be controlled by your theme, I'm now putting a query loop on a page, and now I can put any block before it, after it, explanation, whatever. It's a page that just happens to have that query loop built into the page itself. So again, I'm still using the same original content for my original site. I just happen to have a query loop block built in. In this case, it's an advanced one that gives me some filtering. But I can add I can go up here and I can say, add before, and add, here's the content. This is very lame, but, and I save that. So having that kind of control is really something. While that's saving, I guess my connection is slow tonight. I'll show you another type of thing that you can do on a site. Say I go back to the home page, and I know that I put it here. My original content, pretty straightforward, right? So, here's the original site, and if I click on it, I should show one that actually matches. It doesn't really matter. I'm just using kind of and this is Cadence. If I was using a different theme, I could activate another theme. It would output it that way. Um, but the content is pretty straightforward, based on what I said in the customizer, and there you go. But now, you may decide that on a redesign, there is some enhancement that you want to do. And I'll give you a quick example. If I go to, actually, I think I did it for all three of these. Um, I went to, I said, you know what? The overall layout's going to be the same. The header is different because, and I can have, again, complete control over this. I can make it a transparent header based on the theme. I can do all this kind of stuff. But in this particular case, I use the Cadence Google Maps block in it to say, I'm talking about Kent State Falls and under planning your visit, and then I put the map there, right? So this is now a level of enhancing a certain amount of content. How much you could do of that may depend on how much content you're actually managing. And then there are ways to kind of do that in bulk if you use, for example, in a lot of tools do this. Cadence is the Cadence elements, where you can then take a section and say lock it into the top or bottom of it, or wherever you want on a page based on certain criteria, and you can kind of do group ways of editing. But in this particular case, I was like, you know what? I've got some places where I can actually put a map and show you where Kent Falls State Park is.
So I could restate this one for you, Peter.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
This is, I'm writing these down as you're going through them because this is a good. So this is another option of doing a redesign at a page template level. I know you're not using full site editor, but that's basically what you did, right? You said, all right, I'm going to create a new. I'm not going to use the one that came with Cadence. I'm going to create my own, either using the Cadence hooked elements, whatever, or if you're using a full site editor theme. This is where you create your own page template for your blog pages or whatever.
Yep.
Just by doing that, you're right. It could make it look like everything. You've kept all your blog content. You've kept your theme most likely. You're just restructuring things, but you're not doing it blog post by blog post. You're doing it at a template level, so it applies to all of those. And you could do that at some other page template levels too. So it's a redesigning in place.
Yep. How about you take over?
Yeah. Good. So I think, and again, kind of echoing what you said in the beginning, it's like, I will, I'll bring in my notes here in a second too. If you can do back to the beginning of this redesign versus rebuild, if you can rebuild in a lot of ways, it's a heck of a lot easier. It really is, because what Peter showed you, that sometimes, when somebody says they want to rebuild something, a lot of times it is for aesthetic reasons, like, oh, I don't like how this looks, I don't like this. It's things that you can change. We'll talk about I'll show you some examples of where you can't and you want to consider rebuilds. But if you can restructure things, or if you can, if you're kind of happy with the theme in general that you have, and from a technology standpoint, everything's okay, but it's more of a look and feel thing. In my mind, that's a great case for just redesigning as opposed to doing a rebuild. So kind of segues into then, well, when would you want to do an actual rebuild? Well, I think you covered this early on too, is that sometimes there's things that just for technology reasons need to be rebuilt. So for example, let's say it's old, obsolete technology. So I'm going to show a site that was built in just straight HTML, but maybe it's something that was built, again, it's something that either has lost support, maybe it's a tool or something that was built that built the site that is no longer being supported, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some technology reason that would say you want to no longer work with that site. Another one too, kind of related to the technology, is maintenance costs. So I've probably be working on a site later this year, which is a rebuild. The site was built in WordPress, but because it was built so many years ago, and so many is such a relative term, I think the site was actually built 7 years ago or so. And 7 years ago, as we know, like in IT, a lot of things can change. So it was built, like Peter, you're saying, like Genesis. I never used the Genesis theme, but this site I'm probably going to rebuild. It was built using kind of an old pattern that worked well. It has advanced custom fields and a custom built theme. So the custom built theme is basically taking data from advanced custom fields and using that to populate a page. it was great when it worked, but the problem is, as the client over the years has wanted more and more changes, and that original theme developer has been gone for years, it's become more of a hassle to maintain. So something that like should be so simple has become just complex. And they're like, you know what? They just want to kind of start over again and start with a new site. Page builder issues was another one Peter mentioned too. That let's say you had a site that was built in what's the one? Visual Builder, one of those that came from ThemeForest and all that. Over time, it's going to have limitations. It's going to get slow. Things may not get updated, especially all those offshoots of Visual Builder that are out there. So, that could be a good candidate to say, you know what, the nice thing about going to the blocks, Gutenberg, for all it's still continued issues, at least they are native blocks, and there's a lot more you can do with them. Just a couple other examples of why rebuild. Maybe the original site's on more of a closed platform like Squarespace or Wix or something, or I've seen them on with the Google sites, with Google website thing, and someone's like, "Oh, I want you to work on this." Like, nope, because I don't touch those things. But if they want it to expand and scale, et cetera, that could be a reason to rebuild it. I went through this a couple of years ago where a client, it was something about their business where they used to have a website. They kept telling me, "Yeah, we have a website. We have a website." And I'm like, "Well, can I get the login credentials?" And after a couple of weeks back and forth, it turns out the site was gone because nobody ever paid the bills. And they thought they had a site, and it had been archived and disappeared years ago. So I had to go, I don't know if I put it in here. Yeah, I went through the Wayback Machine. I had to look at the old site. And again, Wayback Machine, if you never used it before, you can see some snapshots, but not everything. So I was just kind of using it as a very, very loose template of what to rebuild. And then some other big ones, a major redesign. If you're changing a lot, I mean, like Peter showed a couple examples that can quickly make a site look nice. But if you're talking about like restructuring things and doing all this stuff, sometimes it just throw in the towel. It might be better starting off from scratch and doing a rebuild. A couple other just quick ones too. If it doesn't display well on mobile devices, I'll show an example of that in a second. A lack of a content management system too. Some of these old sites, maybe it was one person they always had to go to make the updates to the site. There were no content management systems. There's a lot of sites like that still out there, hopefully less and less these days. Again, older technology probably means accessibility issues. And then again, why this is sort of a sales pitch for WordPress too. Why do we all use WordPress, or most of us? It's because you get all the plugins, you get all the themes, you get flexibility, extensibility, security, all those things with kind of a modern content management system. So, those are maybe some of the reasons why, you'd want to do a rebuild versus a redesign. And again, I think if you're flipping a coin, go for the redesign, because I'll talk about some of the issues and challenges with the rebuild. But, again, there's certainly legitimate reasons to do a complete rebuild. All right, so let's talk about, and I'll show this example too, because this is one I'm kind of in the middle of working on. But this is a site. Again, this is for a local historical society, and you can see it has some interesting, so it's built HTML, static HTML, has some really neat little JavaScript kind of flash images, or I don't even know what some of these are in the background. I think it's maybe JavaScript, some broken links, things like that. So this site, just to start off with, again, it kind of meets a lot of those criteria I talked about. It was built years ago. Person who built it kind of, was a friend of a friend of a friend of the society who built it. They're gone. They want to make changes. They have a really hard time making changes. Technology, et cetera, is tough to maintain on this. Security. There's many things that they want. They want to have like online forums. They want event calendars, things that nobody is going to build that into something like this. And then from a mobile standpoint, just as you can imagine, if you look at this, what does it look like on a mobile device? Terrible. You can't scroll. There's, things are hard to click. Accessibility, I shudder to think what this looks like if you ran this through a screen reader. SEO, if you do a search on the site, only like 2 pages are indexed, and there's no, metadata behind it. So it served their purpose. They have a site. They're kind of like, it was better than nothing. Navigation wise, just I'm not picking on the site. There's many examples like this. Navigation wise, some of these links don't even work. Some of them just go to the same page over and over again. And again, it gets worse. Some of this is not text. This whole thing, I think, is actually an image. Yeah. So again, accessibility, not good. So this is a prime candidate. So this is a site that, and again, it's kind of brought up this topic too. This is a site I'm working on right now to rebuild. So I'll talk you through a little bit of what I'm doing, what I've done, kind of my thought process. And again, as we said before, it's not like there's one, again, with WordPress, there's more than one way to tackle anything. There's hundreds of ways. So I'll just talk about my approach, and I definitely like to hear others too have kind of done a similar project, kind of how you've handled things like this. So I guess, my how, here's kind of my thinking on this. And this is, I've rebuilt a couple similar oldish sites, at least have some lessons learned of this, but I did want to try to at least reuse as many existing assets as possible. And my reasoning behind that was, first off, just I didn't want to start from scratch. They already have a site. There's some decent content on here in terms of text. Again, this is a historical society, so there's some good information about the history of the town, some of the historic homes that they support. So I didn't want to throw this away. This probably just needed to be cleaned up, but it could be reused. I was fearful at first about the images because, again, some of these images, when you go to that homepage again, these looked like the size of like postage stamps. So I wasn't sure how much of that I could reuse. Some of, as I showed you earlier too, some of the information, I think it was this one, I can't even scrape this normally. I'll show you techniques for that too. Again, AI to the rescue. So I needed to like OCR this basically to get this text. But my thought was to try to reuse as many existing assets as possible. One for a time's sake, kind of cost. Cost is time, etc. And also I wanted to at least show them. I want to show them something as opposed to a bunch of like wireframes and just blank placeholders because they're going to be confused and say, "Oh, that doesn't meet our needs." So the other thing that I've been thinking about, and I'll show you this, what I've built so far is, it doesn't really apply to this site, luckily, but the other project I'm going to be doing later this year, you really do have to plan data migration. So in this case, this site didn't really have that many pages. I'll show you how I was, well, actually, let me show you right now. So, if you want to do an inventory of an existing site to see how big it is, there's a couple ways to do that. You can use a tool, an SEO tool. I think we showed like Screaming Frog here before. The free version of Screaming Frog is good for 100 URLs or 100 links. If you have a big site, that may not work for that. Another just really simple thing is in Google, if you just go in, if you go to a Google screen and you just type in site colon, so if I go here, just type in site colon, yep, and then put in the site name. Here we go, that's what's indexed. 6 pages. So, but that again, if you want to, and this isn't the whole site, but this kind of gave me an idea too of, okay, here's kind of what's indexed. There's actually more pages than this, but this may give you a rough idea of what you're going to tackle in terms of moving content over. Because one of the issues too is like these older sites, unless you're crawling it, you may not know. There may be pages that existed here before, but they don't show up on a menu. It might be something that is kind of hidden away. It's buried someplace deeply. It's hard to navigate. That's kind of why they want to redo this site. So you do want to kind of start off, as I was talking about this, reusing existing assets. You want to start off by actually doing kind of an inventory of what's there. And that includes pages and links, et cetera, because that's going to help you later when you're talking about doing a data migration. So depending on the complexity of the old site and what you have access to, you may have to consider things like, what do I do with all the blog posts? If this was an existing WordPress site, what do I do with the blog posts? I helped with a project, it's going on 2 years ago now, that was, it was a custom content management system for a school district. And they were using this proprietary school software. So they had blog posts, but they were things that like I couldn't get access to them. So we literally screen scraped, for years worth of data. And they eventually said, "Oh, just give us the last 2 years." But it was hundreds of posts, and I didn't have AI tools. I didn't have Peter to pick his brain to figure out how to do that. But that's a big thing. And even within WordPress, we probably won't cover it so much today, but it's not always an easy thing to export everything you need, even from a blog post. That's a whole, I think I'll talk about it a little bit later, this whole data liberation idea, which I'm curious now with WordPress development kind of being stuck a little bit where this is going to go. This had me really excited, this whole idea of data liberation. So that's, again, data migration, I would say in some ways is as almost as big or can be as big as the rebuild itself. If you're taking over a large site and moving that over, all the stuff that site did, like another site I rebuilt years ago was that, I think I've showed it before, the Polish genealogy site. They had databases. They said they had databases. Well, they were all like, what were they, like Excel spreadsheets, all this kind of stuff. So I had to put that into a real searchable data table. So it was all of that data migration, files. I helped with another site a couple of years ago where it was all links to files they had stored on a local web server. So all of this stuff, again, not to scare people back to the redesign, all of this stuff can be as big as the actual rebuilding, all the building pages, the data part. It can be larger a lot of times.
Now, Ray, real quick,
Sure.
going through this and quite a few times myself too, is there's the whole saying, okay, let's spend some time putting an outline together of the content that you can find, just that outline level, and then you use that as a, okay, what do we need, right? So again, how far back? You get sites that go, oh, you know what, anything older than 2 years doesn't matter now. Or you get, oh, we've got thousands of documents online, and then, well, how many of those do you need right now? Oh, 10, whatever. But going through that also saves you having to do a lot of work on stuff that you don't have to do a lot of work on if you can go through a process where you make it visible that there's more stuff there, and then say, are we going to keep that? And then also introducing, or are we going to add something to a better? You're probably touching on that too, and maybe something else goes away, and then you're not putting all of that work trying to resurrect old content that just doesn't apply anymore.
And if you're doing this for a client, the best way to steer that conversation is cost. It goes back to the, hey, 50% of your cost of this project is all because of these years worth of data you're going to migrate, as opposed to if you only need 1 year's worth, guess what? That cost just shrunk down. So yes, I agree. It's stuff to account for. Also, that inventory, I'll talk about this a little bit later. It's going to come in handy when we talk about things like SEO considerations and redirects and things like that. So knowing what you're knowingly getting rid of, you still may need to account for even on the new site, even if you're not migrating the data over. So I'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, again, so links create the redirect rule. So I'll show you kind of what I've started with this site. Again, this is like no big shakes. I'm still probably like halfway, 2/3 of the way done with it. So I was able, and part of my thinking too, after I talked to them too, I talked to the group, I met with them and said, hey, what are your needs? What are your wants? They want to do, they want to add event calendars, they want to do online payment for members, they want to just basically like have a more modern platform. I did find another, I don't know if I have it here or not. I don't have it. One thing that I showed them, which really helped with this conversation, is, let's say, I think it was Enfield. Yeah, so these guys were a good one. It really helps too to show people like what it could look like. So this was a good example site that I found at the Enfield Historical Society. Really nice, clean looking site built on WordPress. So this one at Glastonbury, I showed them a couple other local ones just to say, hey, even though you may not be as big as this, you may not have all the needs of this. Here, let's pick some ideas out from these sites. So I think we ended up settling on, like, we talked about this even years ago when Peter and I did a presentation about, let's build a site together, and that's on our YouTube channel. But the idea is having some sort of samples or inspiration to show them, and within their domain, that really helped out a lot. Like, oh, they love that, they love this. They kept picking out ones that really, seemed like something that they wanted. So having said that, that gave me some information to start building this. So this is basically, like I said, I'm still in the middle of doing this. I'm hoping to get it done in the next several weeks or so. But some of the one thing that made a huge difference was, this is just a picture I took. Yeah, I said some photographs. As anyone knows, the better the pictures, that alone makes everything look different and looks better. And this is just, I mean, I took this with my iPhone. I'm not a photographer, but it was 1,000 times better than just this, something. So as soon as they saw that, like, wow, that looks great. But a lot of these other photos are photos from their site, just repackaged differently. So again, going back to there's some great photos here of Newington. I know Peter, you grew up in Newington, so there's some really cool photos of historic. I remember this movie theater, historic places in Newington. So I didn't want to lose those. And fortunately, what I found, I was really afraid, as I said, when I looked at these, I'm like, boy, these are going to be so tiny. These are going to be like awful postage size. But you know what? They actually weren't. They were big enough that once I brought them out and downloaded them, and I'll talk about that in a second too, how I did that. Um, they actually looked fine. They looked really good. So, it was just really getting them out of this format. So real quick on that. So, how, if you need to reuse assets, how do you scrape that? I'll be interested to hear, Peter, if we have time, you tell me about the tool that you used. But, again, it could be as simple as right-clicking on something, open the image and save it. That's the simple way. We've talked before about this browser extension called Hoverify. I think there's other ones that do this as well, but you can basically turn on assets here and you can download everything or download them one by one. That's a real quick way to kind of scrape images, at least, off of the site. So I started with that. As I said, I grabbed as much content as I could. As I said, I don't think I'm gonna have time to show it here, but like for these PNGs, all I did was I downloaded this, uploaded to ChatGPT and said, please turn this into text for me. And then there you go. I have to type all this stuff myself. And it did a great job of that. So it's scraping as much content as I could. And, so in terms of what I've done, it's kind of like what you showed, Peter, of like, I took what they had and just redesigned it, repurposed it. Like the homepage, I wanted to call out the historic sites, make those kind of big. Their news and events. And again, this all came from all these other historical societies that are doing things like that. Adding stuff like, sign up for a newsletter, adding a membership. I don't know if I added that yet. So this is all, now that it's in WordPress, now we can use things like a forms plugin instead of downloading a PDF and mailing a check like they had before. And, so once you're at this point, and like I said, a lot of this was just me grabbing stuff from the current site, but I also did, I didn't have enough content. So luckily I live in Newington. So I went to the building, again, working with the society. I took additional pictures, et cetera, made it into a gallery, did the whole, the map thing. So it was like, I didn't want to just take it 100% as is, but just by taking, I'd say I've probably reused at least 2/3, if not 75% of the content from here, moved it around, added stuff to it, put a couple tweaks in, added new functionality to it. So I've been able to reuse a lot that way. I'm seeing for a time standpoint. So a couple other things, again, considerations. I haven't gotten to this point yet on this one, but and this one's probably not as big for their old site, because their old site didn't really have any SEO stuff behind the scenes. But if you're doing a larger migration, especially if it was a site that was built in WordPress too, you want to consider all that metadata that might have been entered. Luckily, most SEO plugins, most of the big ones, I should say, you can either export the SEO data, or if you install a plugin, you can basically, like I think SEO Press, the one I use, it can import in SEO information, from another plugin, and it recognizes multiple formats like Yoast, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something you want to make sure you don't lose. You don't want to just, that's one of the fears of rebuilding a site, is you don't want to break the SEO on the site because you've done things like lost all the metadata. An additional thing, really critical thing too, was, again, if you're redesigning, I haven't got to the point yet on this site, but I'll show you what I did for another one, is if you're eliminating links, you want to make sure you account for everything in a redirect. So this one would be from the redirection plugin, and this might be from SEO Press. I forget which, but basically what I did is, one of those plugins allows you to download a template, and then I found it much easier to work on this in like an Excel spreadsheet, because you can copy and paste big chunks and all that kind of stuff. So the way this works is, this was the column to say, here's the old page, here's the new page, what kind of redirect do you want it to do? Is it active? And what kind of match do you want to do? So you can do all this, or work with the client to say, well, this page is gone. Where do you want it to go to? In this case, a lot of them just end up going to the generic blog archive, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, the other project I did before had like a couple hundred of these, and then you can import it. Then later on the new site you're building, import all those in as redirection rules and make sure you test them, obviously. So that's a big thing. If you're doing restructuring in particular, you don't want all these just to end up as like broken links or 404s, because that again can impact SEO. A couple other real quick things too. So in terms of when the site goes live, this was I think make sure that they're testing it. So make sure you're doing this all obviously on the staging area. Make sure the people are validating it all the way through, not just content, but functionality. That's where I go back to, is there something that maybe isn't apparent on the old site? This almost burned me on another site before where they're like, oh, what about this XYZ thing? I'm like, what are you talking about? And it was like, oh, it really wasn't part of their site. It was another, it was like a Google site or something that was linked elsewhere. I'm like, I'm not touching that. That's not part of the migration. That's a whole other separate issue. So just whatever their common functionality is, again, just make sure that's still working. And then last but not least, fallback options. So when you do go live with the new site, you basically have to shut the old one off. What do you do with the old one? And how quickly can you revert if there is a problem for whatever reason? Again, backups, so all that kind of stuff. So again, it's a lot more work. That's why I go back to the Peter's part there too, of you can do a lot with a redesign. But there are times again where it may not be worth it. From a cost standpoint, maybe the redesign is like you'd be better off doing a rebuild instead. So that's it. I'll stop there. I don't know if there's any major questions about the rebuild part of things. Let me unmute yourselves too. Sorry. I just said it too. If anyone has a question too, you can feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, and I'd also be interested in some of the best practices too, or not best practices, but it's almost more like the tricks that you may have come across or whatever. Like you're doing the images, right? So I look at that site and I see how old it is. So one of the things I do is I get the URL for an image, and then I see if I take the image out and go to the directory, are they set up on a server where you can see the files? And yeah, you could. Not all of them, because then they have one folder called index HTML, which reads as an index and then goes to the homepage. But
maybe there's a full-size image there instead. You're right, instead of the small.
Yeah, exactly. That is a trick I've used many times, less and less because of the way things are. But yeah, on this particular site, there is a directory that you can go to and you can view the files in it. And so yeah, there are a lot of kind of tricks and poking and using that inspector to see where things are. And
this was, sorry, I forgot about this. So on the whole data liberation thing, I think we talked about this before. So this is the WordPress. This was on the roadmap. We don't know where this is, but anyway. So one of the things of this data liberation roadmap, I think we talked about this last year during the State of the Word, was they kind of showed off this experimental screen scraping thing called, there's a browser extension. I haven't tried this in forever. I think I tried it when we did the demo. In fact, it doesn't seem like it's really been updated that much. But the idea was you could you could import a site into WordPress, and it would import it, I think, into Playground. So this was a GitHub browser extension. And I remember seeing on the demo for this, do you remember this, Peter? This was like the State of the Word last year. Their demo video, they showed it going to a site and like scraping. I don't remember if it was a page or not, but it basically scraped it, and then it imported all that into blocks and created a page in the WordPress Playground of it. I was like, that's kind of neat. Again, I don't know how well it would rebuild the thing, but again, there's little things you can do, I think, to make the data migration part easier, the better. Because that, to me, that's one of the big pains of this is like, okay, you don't want to lose anything, but besides copying and pasting, which I've done.
Yeah. I know. In terms of like scraping and putting it in a format, I am using like ChatGPT, which has just added yet a whole nother updated set of tools.
I'm curious, without going into it right now, but how are you doing it? Like, how are you pointing ChatGPT to it?
So I had one thing I used an interim tool to basically scrape the content as a big markup file, and then I went it through ChatGPT. And in this particular case, it was like, help me take all of this content and duplicate content and all, and then create a better organized layout of the content and getting rid of the redundant content and things like that. So instead of that manual process, I have a client right now that is just taking literally forever because it's just so hard for them to get the key people together to figure out what they want to do. So it's another example now that I have the tools to be able to say, okay, I'm going to grab everything and I'm going to use AI to take that, organize it, and also look at the site's top level organization now and create and say, how about this? Right. And that gives them something to react to, which is always a benefit in these things where you say, okay, you're kind of frozen and kind of how I'm going to put something in front of you and go, what about this? Or even worse, this is what I'm going to work on until you tell me differently. Oh, we got to change things. Great. Tell me what you need to change. But yeah, so scraping, creating, saying, go read the site and tell me what's missing. I'm doing something where I said, look at comparable sites, right? So the same type of site, but in different states. This is an association that is in many, the same type of thing, like water conservatory type work and all. Look at those, analyze those, and say, what should we include? That type of thing. Now I'm using this, what would be a very manual process to do much more efficiently.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, it's kind of like again, we talked about that when we did that whole session about, let's build a site together. So it's those same steps, but rather than starting from scratch, in some ways it's good. You have something to work with, but in some ways it's kind of like, how much can you reuse? And you don't want to be limited, I guess, is what I'm trying to fumble through. You don't want to be limited by what the old site was structured or looked
Right.
like. So you want to have a bit of a free hand, but you also don't want to completely throw everything away from what you
Well,
previously.
that's why I'm introducing looking at comparable sites,
Yeah,
partly because in terms of like when people are doing this clients, but even if you're doing it yourself, you're kind of like, well, what are the best ones doing? I should be doing that. And this is a way of now kind of making that process of understanding that happen more quickly.
yeah,
And now you have kind of the short list you can pull it, and they might say, oh, we don't do that, or we can't do that, or whatever. But like, and then it's introducing stuff. In this particular case, one of the things I'm adding is um it's very just like, see, I think this would apply to what you're doing for Newington, right? And by the way, when you put up the Newington Cinema 99-cent theater
99-cent cinema. Yeah,
with
I've
the
been there.
buttered popcorn,
Yeah, I've been there.
with the neon clock in the front next to the screen,
Now
which
it's
is
a dollar store, Peter.
a dollar store now.
It really is.
But that's a site that where, especially because now it's people our age, right? My age, that the photography is huge.
Yeah,
So there's Facebook pages where people are posting things
yeah,
about the area and all, but it's user generated content, which is one of the things that I'm doing for the water, because people are out in the woods, on the rivers, on hiking and all, and it's just like, hey man, it's the photography that makes people fall in love with the
it
place if
does.
they've
Yeah,
been there. So now having user generated content, and that's all new content, but that's taking what they've got and now building an avenue to where we can build out more things where, yeah, now it's going to be photo galleries are going to be a huge aspect to it, so
yeah.
Guys,
My kind of final thing on this too is, like I said, I have that other project that's lurking in the future about, and they keep calling it a rebuild, but in some ways I'm going to try it as a redesign to begin with. But the problem with it is, this is the site I was talking about that has like all the data was basically advanced custom fields and a custom built template. So I'm sort of at the point where like the pages, and there's like at least 30 or something, some odd pages. I'm like, I could kind of, if I just did a redesign in place, like what you showed, the blog would look great. The blog would, because it's not using any of these, really, the templates. it's all those pages. So I'm basically I'm gonna have to do a rebuild of the pages, but a redesign of the rest of it. Like, it's a hybrid approach. We'll see.
Hey, Ray,
Yep.
Ray, you there?
Yep, I am.
Oh, okay, I didn't know my mic was on.
Yep.
So, yeah, you guys put on a great presentation. The one thing like it was good you showed that site. For me, a decision of rebuild or brand new, it always comes down to how much Scotch tape and baling wire was used on the old site, because
Right.
it doesn't take much to make your life a living hell.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, I used to be in remodeling, and I'd go into some kitchens and I'd go, well, the first thing we're going to do is rip everything out.
Yep.
And then, oh, no, we just want to know. No, you don't understand. It's easier. But sometimes it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I agree with you, Peter, on the organizational of it. I think you really have to do, before you touch a thing,
Yeah.
you have to go through and really have a lot of stuff worked out, planned out. There's always going to be changes on the fly, but
yeah.
I use a program now called Glue Maps, GLOO maps.com, that makes it super easy to whip up a flow chart.
Yeah.
But the big thing, so you're either going to do this for a friend or yourself, your own, but you really have to, when you're doing it for someone else, you have to really understand who are the decision makers.
Yeah.
So if you're dealing with a company or an organization, a nonprofit, you really have to understand who are the decision makers and what is their capabilities, because you could end up talking for hours with somebody who really has no decision-making power.
Yeah.
And that's a waste of time.
Yeah.
And often the decision makers really don't know what they want, or if you hear from a decision maker who you feel doesn't really understand the internet, and you hear, well, I like, okay, well, you're either going to run or have to do some education.
Yeah.
There's some wisdom in there, Jim. There's definitely some wisdom in that. Yeah.
Yeah. There are some things to do with those key decision makers that you realize are kind of getting stuck on certain aspects of the site content, for example, coming up with it. But then when they have things that you clue in on that they, I like or I don't like, as simple as, oh, she really doesn't like rounded corners. Now it's the smallest thing, but it'll save you some headaches if you understand that that's an important thing. Or again, when you get something like, oh, boy, he really loves this particular site, and you look, and so you go, okay, we can model off of that, whatever. So you can kind of eliminate some of those things like, oh, well, I thought, this is a very organic, water oriented. I use some rounded corners and you don't like rounded corners. Now, I presented you something that you don't like. And oh, by the way, they're going to focus on that and not on the content very often, which is one of the more frustrating things when you're doing a redesign or a rebuild, when you get so caught up on certain things that matter the least. I am most happy when we're focusing only on the content, the target and all, but that's a luxury. You try to direct that. The best way is to balance the two and make sure you're giving them enough of the things that keep them happy while drilling down on the stuff that ultimately matters, that's going to really keep them happy in the long run.
And the other thing I really agree with you, and it's not a secret, I mean, but I don't think a lot of people necessarily do it, is I spend a lot of time looking at websites for similar companies. I go, Seattle, Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles. I spend a lot of time on that. Not so much with that I'm going to steal somebody's ideas, but just getting and you'll find that 80% of the websites out there, even for successful companies, really suck.
Yeah, they're not great. Yeah, I'd agree.
And you're right. That's why you can't pick, even like the sites I did for historical societies, just in Connecticut, because I wanted them to at least be familiar with them. Some of the towns in Connecticut that you think are more affluent, they'd have the better websites. Nope. It varies so much too. So yeah, but you're right. The thing about doing that, of finding things within their domain for any site, is at least there's familiarity both with features, functionality, wording, et cetera, so it makes your life so much easier.
One of the hardest things that you run into when you're dealing with especially nonprofits, these types of organizations where, as people kind of come and go, there's a lot of bolted on stuff. Well, I couldn't make it that way. So, that's why you can go to, oh, great, they're working in WordPress, but why do they have 4 slider plugins loaded and 3 page builder? It happens because, well, another person comes in and they know what they know, or they try something, or they see a tutorial, those types of things. So that whole deconstruction process, again, in terms of why you would do a rebuild, that what do they call it? Technology debt kind of thing. Those things that get in the way, all of a sudden you go, okay, the site's is running super slow. It's not indexing. It's doing all these things. And it's just like, even if you did the exact same site with modern technology, everything would improve. Never mind the fact that you are going to do a redesign, but hey, getting rid of all of that overhead and just using core blocks and getting rid of some of the fancy stuff that just isn't fancy in 2025, knowing what that is all, is all reason for.
And that's sort of, maybe wrap up at least my thinking on this too. It sort of goes back to, if you're going to rebuild now, it just, for various reasons, I've moved away from page builders, and Divi was the one I used the most, but I've built Elementor sites and all that. The reason I've moved away from those more, not only is because I think that the core blocks, the whole block idea, block editor, has gotten so much better than it was years ago, but also that flexibility it gives you to do a simpler redesign in the future. It's like,
yes,
and it's Elite's nodding to it, because it's, part of the problem with, even somebody thinks that they have a nice modern site, but it's all built with page builders and all that, and you're like, this is, now that's the technical debt too. It's so hard to move away from those things, even though, again, it was a fine decision at the time, but I think sticking with core stuff really gives you so much more, future proofs your site, I think.
Yeah.
I've actually taken clients and like duped their site and then made it and changed it into blocks just to show them. And then I could do this much quicker.
It probably runs faster and loads faster, and
And then I just go, look at that. And then
Yeah.
you could just really, of course now I have to lock everything down, but still, yeah. But yeah, no, Peter, I'm still dealing with that big website and rebuilding it, but they're finally on page about, just because I said, hey, what if I do this, this, and this? What do you think? And they were like, oh, that looks great. And then I went, cool. And then once you do that, then they're like, oh, we'd also like to do. And the next thing you know, you're like, yep, we're doing a redesign.
Yeah.
So,
As long as you get them to look forward.
Yeah.
That's
what I do. Then I go back to the way I work, which is I ask about, like, your business has changed a lot in the last 5 years, you need to reconsider things. And I know the new generation in the company is coming up, and they have new ideas and they want to work differently. And so it's important. So anyway,
100%.
I have to actually go right now, but it's nice to see everybody. And thank you so much for your presentation, because it's such a timely thing.
glad you got some.
Yeah, and Peter, I was so seduced by cadence in the beginning, and I just keep telling myself, no, 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 don't do it. I'm too seduced.
Well, I'm going to say one last thing, because I know
Okay.
you and I have had the whole block theme, classic theme kind of discussion.
Yeah.
The one thing about one release a year and the fact that block themes continue to be this work in progress versus the vast majority of people still on classic themes and everything being solid there, I don't feel any issues with still recommending classic themes, especially if I know, like with the cadence theme, for example. Again, it's not just cadence, Astra. I mean, I have 3: Generate, Press, Cadence, and Astra, that they are also building in to make sure that they work well with block themes, full site editing, and all, as they kind of migrate and kind of hybrid in, so that they're not totally just ignoring it. But we're talking about very little progress for the next few years, especially with what's going on with the whole lawsuit, if anyone wants to talk about that. But this is where we are.
If you didn't notice, that's when I checked out.
I did notice that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it
I
it,
was
think
so depressing to me. My husband doesn't do this, but he just looked at me and he goes, "You're really upset." And I had just seen Matt live, and I like not live in person, but live on screen, and I was like, "This was really horrible." It's
I
just so
think
depressing.
I think the
Yeah,
bad
no, I just couldn't even believe, especially the timing is really horrible for
gosh.
what
well,
everything's going on everywhere else. It's just like, are you serious?
and I kind of go back to my statement just a few minutes ago of, why I recommend these days using core blocks. I think they're better now than page builders. But if
Yep.
they don't change in like 2 years,
Exactly.
it's gonna, is it gonna flip again? And then we're back to where we started. It's like, I don't want to relitigate that again. So,
I know, exactly. So it's really, yeah, it
yeah.
must be hard. Peter, do you still go to Brian's meeting?
I do. I do. I missed this last one. He's taken a couple off. We're talking about the build mode. WP Engine Brian Gardner holds a Friday meeting. That's actually open to everybody, especially he likes the agency, anyone who's dealing with agencies type of stuff too, because that feedback really helps. But it's a great if you look up build mode WP engine, I think you should be able to find the calendar to sign up for it. But it is a great safe space discussion for an hour on a Friday. Uh, yeah, still I like it a lot.
Okay. Well, say hi and thank you very much, both of you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're gonna
Okay.
wrap up now anyway, too. So thanks everyone for joining. So
All right.
next month,
Bye-bye.
believe it or not, is beginning of our summer school series.
Oh,
We're
right.
back to those for 3 months. So
love
wide
it.
open. So hope everyone can join us then. If not, have a good rest of the month, and we'll see you next month. Thanks for joining, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.